next public hearing is on RZ 2013 MV001 A&R Huntington Metro LLC to rezone from C5 to PRM to permit mixed-use development with an overall floor area ratio of 3.0, approval of the conceptual plan, waiver of minimum district size, and waiver number 25678 WPFM 001-1 to permit the location of underground stormwater management facilities in a residential area located on approximately 1.04 acres of land in the Mount Vernon district. And who do we have here who can reaffirm the affidavit?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mark Looney was clearly on behalf of the applicant, and we reaffirm the affidavit dated January 9, 2014.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. And I'll ask at this time if any board member has a disclosure to make in this application. Any disclosures? If not, if staff could please locate the property and describe this application to us.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Megan Duco with the Department of Planning and Zoning. The subject property is located in the Mount Vernon district along Huntington Avenue within 1/4 of a mile of the Huntington Metro Rail Station. The property is a corner lot bounded by Huntington Avenue to the north, Glendale Terrace to the south, and Biscayne Drive to the west. The application area includes 5 parcels totaling 1.04 acres and currently contains 4 single-family attached dwellings, a 12-unit apartment building, and an associated surface parking lot. The applicant is seeking approval of a rezoning from the C5 district to the PRM district to permit a mixed-use development. The proposed development includes up to 139 multifamily dwelling units and up to 3,534 square feet of ground floor retail within one building at a 2.99 floor area ratio. On November 19th of 2013, the Board of Supervisors held a public hearing on this rezoning application. Subsequent to the public hearing and prior to the Board's decision on the application, the applicant revised the proffers in the plans. As a result, it was determined that new public hearings before the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors would be necessary. On December 3rd of 2013, the Board passed a motion to remove the rezoning application from the Board's agenda and to schedule a new public hearing in front of the Board of Supervisors. The motion also referred the final development plan back to the Planning Commission. As described in the staff report addendum, the applicant has made revisions to the plan since the initial public hearing. The applicant added an additional level of parking below the first floor, which increases the overall number of parking spaces available within the garage from 161 spaces to 191 spaces, and this includes 10 spaces for the retail use. Staff from Public Works is now recommending approval of the associated parking reduction request. The elevations of the garage doors along Biscayne Drive have been slightly amended to account for internal revisions, but the lateral position of both garage entries remains unchanged. The applicant has also removed the alternate Huntington Avenue elevation that proposed possible residential units along Huntington Avenue instead of retail. The proffers still allow for the substitution of residential amenities or public uses instead of the retail. The building footprint and height as well as the site layout have not changed since the previous CDP-FDP. The building's entrance, lobby, and residential amenity area would be located at street level along Huntington Avenue, and retail uses would be located along Huntington Avenue at the eastern end of the ground floor. The building's maximum height continues to transition from approximately 80 feet along Huntington Avenue to approximately 36 feet along Glendale Terrace. The revised plans continues to propose one private courtyard on the 3rd floor of the building, private unit patios along Biscayne Drive, private residential frontage along Glendale Terrace, and 4 pockets of publicly accessible open space as shown here on this slide. The image here displays a portion of the map of the current residential parking permit district which surrounds the proposed development. As clarified in the staff report addendum, future residents of the proposed development would be eligible for parking permits because the residences will have addresses on a public street within the district or on a street outside of the district but abutting a street within the district. Further board action to amend the district boundaries or eligibility requirements would be necessary to remove these residents' eligibility for parking permits. The applicant's current proffers state that the applicant will cooperate with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation and the Board of Supervisors to modify the boundaries or eligibility requirements to prohibit the property's residents from receiving permits to park within the district. The applicant's revised proposal provides for additional parking spaces within the parking garage and maintains the various positive elements noted in the initial staff report. However, the revised CDP-FDP does not resolve all of staff's outstanding issues noted in the staff report. As shown on this slide, the following issues remain outstanding with the current proposal as described in the staff report addendum. Given the overall intensity in the treatment along Biscayne Drive, staff remains concerned about the compatibility of the proposed development with the stable surrounding residential area. Staff believes that the proposal lacks adequate publicly accessible open space. Staff remains concerned about the applicant's option to substitute residential amenities for the retail use. In staff's opinion, the applicant is not providing for creative stormwater management techniques to fully meet the intent of the comprehensive plan site-specific language, and the application is not in accordance with the policy plan on noise mitigation for all of the outdoor activity areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of staff?
Yes.
Questions? Supervisor Highland and then Supervisor McKay.
On the subject of residential permit parking, presently we do have pending in process a relook at our whole residential permit parking policy and rules. And one of those possible changes that I trust we will have come to the board will be the subject of a proposed residential development such as this, and whether it makes sense to have them included within the authority to use the residential permit parking. Because obviously this proposed development, it doesn't make any sense to have them be permitted to use it, because we're asking, the whole issue that we talked about before was having adequate parking for the people who live in this development. But that process or that proposal is coming before the board. Is that correct?
That's my understanding in talking with staff from Fairfax County Department of Transportation, that there's been conversation about potentially addressing whether or not multifamily residential buildings would be appropriate in receiving those type of parking permits.
And if that change is made, then certainly we would then have the legal authority to restrict a development such as this from adding them to an existing residential permit parking which abuts this development. That's fair to say.
If I could respond to that, Supervisor Highland, Beth here from the County Attorney's Office. We have talked with FCDOT Transportation staff about a potential amendment to the RPP residential permit parking districts to exclude multifamily buildings from the approved RPPD boundaries. I understand that only 2 such buildings would potentially be in play, and the idea would be that they would be excluded because they're so often subject to a process like the one we have today where parking is being regulated. We believe that can be accomplished without affecting the rights of any existing permit holders. Of course, none of the individuals involved in this application would be existing permit holders. So we feel confident of that. The only other option would be to redraw the boundaries of the RPPD, and I understand that that's not anyone's first preference.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Supervisor McKay?
Yeah, just a question about the retail space. I thought I heard in the presentation that it could be converted to residential, and does that mean that we could end up at a point in time with no retail space on the site?
The proffers allow for it to be converted to residential amenities or public uses in the event that they're not able to lease a space within, I believe it's a period of 12 months from the residential use permit, I believe.
So if they can't rent the space in 12 months, they can convert it to other things, and we could end up with no retail.
It's possible.
I'd be interested when the applicant gives their presentation on what efforts they're going to make to try to ensure we get the retail first. I think that's a really important part of this project. I don't think 12 months is enough, but we need retail in this area to support the metro station next door. So I'm going to be interested in hearing how we're going to work to achieve that when the applicant gives his presentation.
All right. With that, if there are no further questions of staff, back over to Mr. Looney, if you could please provide us with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to jump to Supervisor McKay's question first, when this application was before you back in November, one of the options that was provided in the proffers was for a conversion of the ground floor space to residential units in the event that the applicant was unable to unable to lease the retail in the building. That option obviously has been taken out with the plans that you have before you now, and the applicant has provided a commitment to pursue leasing of the retail for a minimum of 12 months after the completion of the building and its occupancy has initiated. Obviously, they will be marketing that space throughout the construction of the project in addition to the 12-month period after the building has already been completed and occupied. And it's in the applicant's interest, as you can imagine, to provide the retail in the building because it adds to the overall value of the project as opposed to having 3,500 square feet of essentially dead space within the building, because it's not as though the applicant has designed the building in anticipation that the amenities will go here. In fact, amenities will already be provided elsewhere in the building, from a fitness center to a leasing center to a business center elsewhere in the building. This is really an effort to try to address the possibility that in the event that they're unable to lease the retail, that they would have some other option than a blank retail store facade along the ground floor on Huntington Avenue. In terms of the parking, staff noted that there are 10 spaces now under the proposed parking reduction that would have to be set aside for the retail uses. There are actually 17 ground floor spaces that would be available on the first floor, 7 of which technically are identified as visitor parking spaces for the residential, but those are likely to be evening types of uses as opposed to daytime uses or weekend uses. And so there's actually more parking on the ground floor to accommodate those uses than there were under the prior designs before you. In terms of the overall summary of what has changed since the last time, clearly the conversation at the board hearing a couple of months ago was centrally focused on the parking and the totality of the parking that was provided on site. We were asking at the time for a parking reduction to bring the ratio down to about 1.14 spaces per residential unit, believing that the proximity to the metro station would mean that the demand for parking would be particularly low in relation to more suburban locations farther from transit or not served by transit at all. Clearly that was met with resistance from the board, and so we rethought the plan and added another level of below-grade structured parking to accommodate 30 additional parking spaces in order to address those concerns. And with that, obviously, the Department of Public Works has agreed that this proposal is sufficient in terms of the amount of parking to be provided relative to its location, the 45% TDM commitment that's been made, and other elements of the project. And it is consistent with other parking reductions that have been granted for projects in very close proximity to this one, including one just down the street at a similar mixed-use development on the other side of the Huntington Metro Station. So with that, I'm happy to address any questions or comments that you might have. I went through a lot of the relationship aspects to the development project, to the townhomes and duplexes that are across Biscayne Drive from the site in response to the elements that the staff has raised, and I'm happy to revisit those with you if you still have questions about that. But I know you have a long agenda today, and I don't want to take up too much of your time unnecessarily.
Questions of Mr. Looney? If there are no questions at this time, thank you very much, Mr. Looney. This is a public hearing. And let me ask at this time if there is anyone who is here who would like to testify on this application. I have no names of folks who have signed up in advance who wish to speak. Anyone who would like to testify? Seeing and hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. There's no need for rebuttal, and I'll ask for the staff and the Planning Commission recommendation.
On November 14th, 2013, the Planning Commission recommended approval of RZ 2013-MV-001 with 4 votes in favor and 3 abstentions, subject to the execution of proffers consistent with those now dated January 27th, 2014, as well as the requested waivers and modifications described in the staff report. On January 23rd, 2014, the Planning Commission approved FDP 2013-MV-001 on a vote of 5 in favor, 3 opposed, and 4 abstentions. Staff recommends denial based on the issues outlined in the staff report addendum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of staff? This is in the Mount Vernon District. I would recognize Supervisor Jerry Highland for a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would move the Board of Supervisors approve RC 2013-MV-001 and the associated conceptual development plan subject to the proffers dated January 27, 2014. I would move the Board of Supervisors approve the following waivers and modifications. Waiver number 25678-WPFM-001-1 to locate underground facilities in a residential area, PFM Section 6-0303.8, subject to conditions dated July 10, 2013, contained in Appendix 8 as Attachment A. Second, waiver of Paragraph 1 of Section 6-407 of the zoning ordinance for the minimum district size for the PRM district. 3, waiver of Section 13-303 of the zoning ordinance for transitional screening and Section 13-304 for the barrier requirements between the uses within the proposed development, and the modification of the transitional screening and waiver for the barrier requirements for the surrounding properties. 4, modification of Section 12-0510-.4E(5) of the PFM to permit a reduction of the minimum 4-foot planting distance from a restrictive barrier. Waiver of Paragraph 3 of Section 8-0201 of the PFM and Paragraph 2 of Section 17-201 of the zoning ordinance for the requirement to construct an on-road bike lane in favor of a contribution for future funding. Waiver of Paragraph 3 of Section 17-201 of the zoning ordinance for the requirement to provide interparcel connections to the adjoining parcels. Waiver of Paragraph 4 and 10 of Section 17-201 of the zoning ordinance for further construction and or widening of existing roads surrounding the application property and of the requirement for undergrounding existing utilities. Modification of Section 11-203 of the zoning ordinance for required loading spaces to permit the loading space depicted on the CDP/FDP. Waiver of Section 6-1307.2E of the PFM for the minimum setbacks of bioretention filters/basins from building foundations and property lines. And waiver of Section 7-0802.2 of the PFM for parking geometric standards to allow projections of structural columns within parking structures into the required parking stall areas. And move the Board of Supervisors direct the Director of the Peewees to approve a deviation from the tree preservation target pursuant to Section 12-0508 of the Public Facilities Manual PFM. And I would so move.
Motion made by Supervisor Highland, or motions to approve and for certain waivers, seconded by Supervisor Jeff McKay. Is there discussion on the motion?
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Smith and then Supervisor McKay.
Just a staff suggestion, perhaps, with Tyson's, when we have a laundry list of waivers, they pass them out ahead of time, so we can just say everything that's on this list. It saves us a lot of tongue twisting
In the future. Supervisor McKay.
I agree with that.
Might be the first example of Tyson saving us time in the future.
Touche, Mauvier.
So that sounds good. I'm going to support the motion. I want to thank the applicant and Supervisor Highland for, I think, some good changes to it. I will say I'm reluctant on the retail piece because I don't think 12 months is enough time. When this application first came, they didn't even give parking to the retail, and so I think I kind of got an idea of how important the retail was. I am concerned about that. We are getting a lot of really good applications in Huntington for a lot of residential, and all those people in those residential units are going to need retail. This is right next to a transit station where our transit riders could benefit from accessible quality retail, and I really hope the retail ends up at this location, and I really hope that future applications that come in give the retail component of the larger mixed-use needs in a transit station area at Huntington a more significant look. But I think overall this is a great application, exactly the type of revitalization we need in the Huntington area, and I'm happy with a lot of the changes, but I sure hope the retail goes in.
Thank you, Supervisor McKay. And I would like to add my thanks to Supervisor Highland and his staff and to the applicant for going back to the drawing board to take a look at some of the issues that were problematic in the previous rezoning and previous action, and I think that this is much improved, and I appreciate the fact that we've been able to come back with this product, because there is a need and a desire for revitalization in this area, and this gives us the opportunity to move forward with that. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to approve, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay, and those motions carry.
I have one more, Madam Chairman.
Okay. Yes, we have to
This is
return
the A2 that I...
Okay, we're returning to...
We are returning to A2.
A2
yes.
from this morning, action number 2.
And this concerns parking reduction for the A&R Huntington Avenue properties. I move that the Board of Supervisors approve the proposed parking reduction request for the A&R Huntington Avenue properties as set forth in the revised board item dated January 28, 2014.
Motion's made by Supervisor Highland and seconded by Supervisor McKay. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. We